Hi, everyone. This is Jason Berwick of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's guest is coming from Mexico, and it is Jeff Berwick, the dollar vigilante himself, is back on for another Wall Street for Main Street podcast. So thanks, Jeff, for coming back on.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jason.
Thanks, Jeff, and I'm definitely glad to have you back on here. Now, in the last 6 weeks or 8 weeks, we've had all these conventions, all the rhetoric. God, I completely overwhelmed with all this stuff. There's Obama commercials on literally every commercial break. Anytime I go websites on my computer, all the Google ads, the stuff pops up on Obama on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter. It's getting pretty ridiculous. They're calling my house now a couple times a day too, and I haven't even voted Democrat ever. So why do you think Americans are so obsessed with politics, so obsessed with both political parties, when there's really not that much of a difference between either political party? I mean, one political party might be more fascist than the other, or one, I guess you could say, is socialist when the other is fascist. Or what's your opinion on this as an outsider who's not American about the American political system and why we're so obsessed?
Yeah, it truly is amazing to watch all these tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people show up at these events. And like you said, there really is hardly any difference between the person that they're cheering for and the other person that they hate. And so it's really, truly amazing that this is going on. But I guess if you look back at history, it makes a lot of sense. The U.S. has been working on indoctrinating people for more than a century now. The U.S. government schools were put into place in the early 1900s. Before that, people were actually quite smart. If you look back at a 1800s private school exam, a young grade 6 exam, they have some of these on the internet. It's unbelievable what the kids knew back then. But they went for that indoctrination system run by the government. Of course, anything run by the government is always a disaster. It's funny how Americans seem to realize that in many ways. They say the Soviet Union was a disaster because it was centrally planned, it was run by the government. Yet so many things in the U.S. today are the same thing, including the education system. Indoctrination system is really all it is. So we've got about 100 years of people being indoctrinated. So it's really not too much of a surprise to see that how whipped into believing into these systems people are nowadays. And then you add on top of that all of the other things, including the media, which is now almost one and the same with the state. The mainstream media almost does nothing except for read press releases from the government direct from the fax machine. So, you have people who have, this has been going on for decades, going to these schools where they're made to do the Pledge of Allegiance every morning, forced to do that, to give their pledge to the government, to the state. Then they return home at night, they turn on the TV, and they get a whole other brand of programming. They actually call it programming, which is pretty funny, because that's exactly what it is. And so it's not surprising after decades and decades of this that people are completely brainwashed and they can't actually see or think critically anymore because they've never been taught to. They've actually been taught the exact opposite. They've been taught how to submit, how to obey, how to show up at 9 in the morning and leave at 5 in school, basically getting them ready for a life of either wage labor or prison, one or the other, and then both people end up in both of them, or most people end up in both of them. So it's really not too much of a surprise that we're at this point now where, you have people like Peter Schiff going down to the Democratic Convention and asking people questions like, do you think we should get rid of profit? And they say yes. That's an absolutely incredible statement to say that we shouldn't want to create any wealth. But then again, there's really no difference between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama at this point. They stand almost exactly the same on almost every issue, except for very minor issues, and then people get whipped up in arguing about those issues. When in actuality, all kinds of politics, all forms of politics, whether it's left or right, is criminal. It's a criminal act because basically what you're saying is you want to make other people do things by force that you want them to do. And that's a very criminal act. It's a criminal behavior, and it's sad to see what's going on in the U.S. That's how morally deprived everyone is nowadays in the U.S. thanks to 100 years of this indoctrination and propaganda.
I think that's a great explanation. That's a lot more than I was thinking you would say on the matter. You really went in depth there. And I think an important thing here is basically what de Tocqueville and some of the other French visionaries that came and viewed, the U.S. as burgeoning democratic style of government, the Republic then, and they basically predicted that all of this stuff would happen, that, the politicians and the bureaucrats would start to come up with new laws and they would bog things down in red tape. And then the politicians would start to bribe the people with their own money, which is essentially what we have now. And you did a really good job of talking about all of the intricacies of basically the brainwashing that we have now. There's a really good book out by author Dmitry Orlov, and it's called Reinventing Collapse. And he escaped from the Soviet Union before it collapsed, and now living here in the United States, he says that the American system of brainwashing, of propaganda, is far more intricate than the Soviets could have ever imagined.
Yeah, they've really perfected it. The Soviets could only wish they had the kind of technology and years of research into what works and what doesn't work that the U.S. government has today. In the old Soviet Union, they used to have two newspapers. Both were obviously propaganda. One was called Izvestia and one was called Pravda. I forget which meant which because I don't speak Russian, but one meant the truth and one meant the news. And there was always a saying in the Soviet Union that people would always say, and that's, there's no truth in the news and there's no news in the truth. And so people back then really realized that what they were seeing was propaganda, whereas if you talk to Americans today, they really believe that what they're seeing on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News is the truth. It's actual, or at least something that's not propaganda. They actually believe they're seeing something worthwhile, when in fact they're just being indoctrinated and programmed with mostly propaganda. It's truly unbelievable. And you look again, like Vladimir Lenin said, if you give me your child for 4 years, the seed I plant will never be uprooted. Well, the U.S. now has got it up to 12 years, and then they go for another 4 years in usually a statist, leftist-based college system. So you're talking about really 16 years. So it's actually quite predictable what's happened in the U.S., and many people have predicted it, like you just said, Tocqueville and many other people. And I remember looking back, too, at some of these people, like even George Orwell, and saying, wow, how did they know this was all going to happen? Well, it's happened before. It's happened actually time and time again since the Roman Empire, since the time of Jesus, who was an anarchist, who was killed by the state because he didn't want to pay taxes. That was really the story of Jesus. And it's been going on over and over and over again. The only problem is the state's getting smarter and smarter and smarter, and the people, thanks to all the indoctrination and programming, aren't. But thanks to the Internet, we really have a chance for the first time to realize what's going on and to de-slave ourselves, to break the chains from the state, to become free, and to create a world that won't have any wars, that will have tons of prosperity, that will hardly be any poverty. Almost all poverty is caused by the state and central banks. And it'll be quite peaceful and prosperous if we can break these chains. And that's why they're trying to now turn off the Internet.
Yeah, almost all the U.S.'s wars, all these wars that really started with LBJ, well, they started before that in the progressive era, but then LBJ went on this humongous spending spree on the welfare warfare state with the guns and butter, and that should have bankrupted the U.S. first. And they had the war on poverty, they had the war on drugs. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more wars. There's going to be the war on probably the Internet, probably sometime in the future too. I'm sure anyone who tries to be honest and help people, they're going to try to go after. They're going after entrepreneurs now. The girl with the lemonade stand. The girl with the lemonade stand who's trying to be a little business owner. They're going after people who, in the past, even the government 30, 40, 50 years ago would never have dreamed of going after, because there's just more bureaucrats and they need to increase their government budget and they need to do something with the money.
Yeah, that's right. That's the natural progression of the state, unfortunately, because, and like I said before, a lot of Americans realize when you say that communism is bad and central planning is bad, that is a correct statement, but they don't seem to realize that almost everything in the U.S. today is centrally planned. So you have all these bureaucrats now, and as always, the kind of people who gravitate to government aren't the best kind of people in society. They're not people who create wealth. They're not productive. They're people who really can't do anything. Like Barack Obama has never really had a job his whole life. He was a community organizer, whatever that is, And he would have been a janitor if it wasn't for the government. And because of the government, though, he learned how to talk real nice and snazzy and read off those teleprompters and how to do all the propaganda kind of stuff. And because of that, he now is one of the most powerful people on earth. He can actually destroy the whole planet right now if he wants to. And that's a guy who's completely morally bereft. He's a complete criminal at heart. He's sociopathic, and he's a killer. He's killed so many people already. I can't even count them all. It's definitely in the thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands at this point, with the Afghanistan and Iraq and everything. So, yeah, it's really just a natural progression. And then you get all these other kind of people, the Nancy Pelosi types, who really, I think they really believe they're doing something good. But what they're really doing is destroying stuff because they don't really know how things really work. They believe, because they're kind of, they've never done anything with their lives, but for some reason, I guess it's a narcissistic, sociopathic bent. They think they're the smartest people around, so they just keep creating all these laws, and now it's gotten to the point where it costs, I think, something like $40,000 to open up a lemonade stand by the time you get all the licenses and the health inspection checks and everything, and they think they're trying to help people by doing this, but they're actually destroying everything, because what we need is people to be able to freely move, freely create wealth, freely do things for the market, voluntary transactions. As long as it's voluntary, it's fine, and that's what we need, and that's what capitalism really is. And again, capitalism, that word has been destroyed thanks to what's going on in the U.S., because a lot of people look at the U.S. as a bastion of capitalism. Capitalism hasn't existed in the U.S. since 1913, when the Federal Reserve was founded. Capitalism would never have a central bank. A central bank is not a part of capitalism. So a central bank is actually a tenet of communism. It's one of the main tenets of communism. So we haven't had a free market in the U.S. for almost 100 years now. And because of all the programming and indoctrination, people are confused. So you go down to Occupy Wall Street, and they think the problem is big corporations. Well, the big corporations are not great, because they team with the government to use the government's force to make people do things and to monopolize industries, but they're not the real problem. You wouldn't even have these big type of corporations in a free market, not the way they exist today. And so people need to get on the internet and realize what's going on, look into things like Austrian economics, which I know you know very well, Jason, and look into things like libertarianism, anarchism. Get your head out of the state's ass.
Well put, Jeff. And I think one of the major problems here is, like you said, it all starts at the school with the seed being planted. Because, it starts in the school. The kids want to learn. I mean, Americans aren't born naturally stupid. There's a lot of book-smart Americans around here. There's a lot of people who went to school and wanted to believe, in the textbooks, and they did a superb job, got A's on and memorized the textbooks, but they memorized Keynesian economics, and they believe it wholeheartedly, and they don't question it. You would be amazed at the level of book-smart people who have no common sense whatsoever and don't question anything. There are Keynesians. I reconnected with one on Facebook recently. I'll tell this story. And this guy graduated from Berkeley, one of the top economic programs in the country, from Brad DeLong's program, and he's telling me that I don't know anything about economics or finance or markets, and that the Fed can easily control, the inflation rate at 3 to 5% nominal GDP targeting for this new stimulus plan. It's just ridiculous how little of real-world experience these guys have, and it's all about, the theory and the stuff they memorize, and they're afraid to admit that they could be wrong.
Yeah, well, the number one person that you're talking about who believes all the Keynesian stuff right now is Ben Bernanke. It's actually a natural progression again. So we've had the state involved with schools for decades now, and they give all these professors these tenures and these sort of things. And what it does, because it's not really a free market in education, they just they grab onto one thing they think they believe, and they just stick with it, no matter how much evidence to the contrary afterwards, because they don't want to lose their tenure, they want to lose their job. And this is very typical. It even happens in other things other than economics, even in things like astronomy. There's so many things wrong with what is taught in university or colleges about astronomy. Most of it's wrong. And if people are interested in that, they should look up a video called Thunderbolt of the Gods, which is about the electric universe, which makes a lot more sense. I'm no expert on astronomy, but from what I've read, it makes a lot more sense. But I do know enough about economics to know that what they teach in those schools is completely wrong, but no one can seem to get their head around it or even ever realize. And that's why I always hear this question a lot. People go, well, eventually these central bankers must figure out that they're the ones causing hyperinflation, but they never do. And if you look back in the Weimar Republic, they had just increased the money supply by something like 100,000 times, and the top central bankers were still arguing there's still not enough money in the economy. That's the problem. If you look in Brazil, this was just last month, and this is unbelievable. The Central Bank of Brazil went on strike because their wages aren't keeping up with inflation. So these people are brainwashed. They're destroying the entire planet because of their brainwashed stupidity. And there's really not much we can do about it except sit here and watch it all collapse, which is a good thing. We just have to survive the collapse and get through to hopefully a whole new world where it's a lot more free market, where free market ideas can really prosper. And that's, again, why the Internet's so great, because a lot of the free market ideas like Austrian economics, I would never have found out about Mises, Ludwig von Mises, or the Mises Institute without the Internet and many other great resources like it. So we really have an opportunity here. I really say that thanks to the Internet, ignorance now is an option. And so if you choose to be ignorant now, it's an actual choice you're making, because the information is finally out there. For the first time in human history, we have access to all information. And the governments are trying to shut it down right now as fast as they can. So get out there and learn as much as you can before they figure it out and turn it off.
Yeah, that's a good point about the ignorance. And I learned Austrian School Economics, too, on the Internet. And I took some business classes undergrad at college, and then I did an MBA program for a year before dropping out because they wanted to indoctrinate me with Keynesian economics in order to complete the program. So I got out before I was wasting my time and money. And basically, like in these libraries, Jeff, like what they do, it's pretty ridiculous. They literally have pulled all the Austrian School Economics books out, and it's like this in some of the other industries, like you talked about with astronomy, but it's like that too with the liquid fluoride molten salt thorium reactor. They don't even teach it that one of the inventors of the atom bomb, of the nuclear bomb, and of the light water pressure reactor, after he was forced to basically by the government invent all of that stuff, because he knew the flaws with it, he then went and spent, more government money, but at least he was working towards a safer nuclear power invention here, and then his funding got pulled after he put the Lifter reactor into testing for over 6,000 continuous hours. So it's just, and if you talk to any person in that industry, for the most part, no one has even heard of the technology because it's been completely removed from all the books.
So typical. There's a million examples of stuff like that. You look at even marijuana or hemp. That used to be one of the biggest industries in the U.S. They actually used to be on the back of the $10 bill was a hemp farmer in about 1920. And
really?
Yeah, and even up until about 1940, people still were applying to get hemp farming, licenses. They still had licenses and stuff back then, but it was just a normal part. And what happened was that hemp became it's so useful. It's so much better than almost any other item for making things. One of the first cars ever made was made out of hemp. Ford's first car was made out of hemp because it was lighter and stronger than most things they had access to at that time. It's so pharmautically good because so many of these pharmaceuticals today are just dangerous chemicals. They actually put you into a death spiral. They just make things worse and worse until you eventually die. But by that point, the whole system has sucked all your money out of you. Things like hemp, smoking some marijuana or hemp oil actually cure cancer. So they don't want these things out there. And this is what happens in a fascist nation-state system, and it's terrible. And we would be living in such a better world today if it wasn't for all of these states, especially the U.S. government, who's been by far the most egregious of all of them in being evil and getting rid of anything good and promoting anything bad.
Yeah, and I think besides, the indoctrination, where this all starts with is rent-seeking. Like, the statistics, a lot of the statistics, the economic statistics are all propaganda. They're nominal, they're fake GDP growth, the CPI numbers are hiding the inflation so the government doesn't have to pay out, more for the entitlement benefits and other things. And it's all about the rent-seeking here because the economic pie, the opportunity for entrepreneurs and small businessmen like yourself, like me, I'm a small entrepreneur, not compared to you. But, there's just not the opportunity there for us to grow the pie as easily as before because of all the rules and regulations. And then the governments, like your silent partner, they're taking 50% of your profits. Then the states are getting their cut. Then there's all the fees from all the government agencies. And then now there's the death tax. So when you die, if the government missed...
No, go ahead. That's just my doorbell.
Oh, okay.
My hairstylist is here, sorry. They come to your house in Mexico. It's pretty cool.
Wow. That's impressive. So if, you've missed any of the, if the government has missed any of the other taxes, then they get it on the death tax too. They take the last 50 or 70% of your estate tax on top of that. Yeah,
it's truly sad that Americans think they're free. When basically they're being just completely impoverished and almost all their money being stolen over the course of their lifetime. If you try to explain it to people, if slavery is someone taking 100% of your productive output every year, at what percent is it not slavery? And you look at the U.S. and really with all the taxes, not just income tax, but every single tax, there's thousands of them, as you know, property tax, capital gains tax, dividends tax, fuel tax, hotel tax, food tax. It really adds up to probably about 60 or 70% of people's income, like you said, keeps them very impoverished. Then inflation also takes away a large part of their purchasing power, which they don't even realize, and that's why they call it the invisible tax. And so by the end of it, they've really got about 10% of their actual productive earnings that they get to keep. And like you said, at the end of it all, the government will take part of that too.
Yeah, it's serfdom. I don't have any better word for it. It's basically what Hayek wrote about in Road to Serfdom, and it's basically happened right before our very eyes. They did it very, very slowly over a number of decades, and, they did it slowly so people wouldn't notice it as much and people wouldn't complain, and then there's a good amount of people in politics in the United States who want to take even more.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. If you look at France right now, a lot of this sort of really socialist, really statist-based stuff really came out of Europe. And it still is there, as you can see what's going on even today in Spain and France. But one of the French politicians was clamoring for 100% income tax above a certain level. And it wasn't that high. It was like $1 million a year or something. So, it's unbelievable. I guess they can't really see, because a lot of these people, again, they don't come from a business background. They don't come from anything. They've never created anything. They've just sort of been indoctrinated. They've grown up in their own little bubble, and they think they're trying to help people. Oh, let's tax rich people at 100%. That'll help everyone.
Most of them also are champagne socialists, Jeff. They're limousine liberals or champagne socialists. Most of these people already grew up with money. So, they didn't have to be an entrepreneur. They didn't have to produce more than they consume, save the difference, invest, take risks, take calculated risks. They didn't have to do any of the stuff that you have done in your career to get to the level you are. And so they're just shouting from their porch that, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that, and they don't want to give people the opportunity, which is what the United States used to be about here, and why the United States still has a lot of illegal immigrants come to the country here, is because people come for economic opportunity for really no other reason.
Yeah, you would know that better than me, living so close to the Beltway there.
No comment on that one. I mean, the amount of rent seekers, we have illegal immigrants here, obviously, but the amount of the political class here, I mean, you wouldn't really know there's a massive recession here in the D.C. area because of, there's literally a property bubble here right now. They are building over 180 luxury condos, like those humongous Miami-type ones are building those with like the fancy restaurants. All the celebrity chefs are coming here and building restaurants now. It's getting pretty ridiculous.
And that's actually the natural progression. Again, that you see that in almost every country. All the power and all the money eventually gravitates to the center of power. And people just more and more clamor to just get some scraps and bits from the who has all the money nowadays, which is the state. If you look at a movie like Lord of the Rings, that was really a movie about the state. The ring was the power of the state, and no one can ever handle the power. Only Frodo for a little while could, and even him, it was very, very difficult. And what it does is it eventually corrupts everyone in society, and it's really sad. It even will corrupt a person like myself, who you would maybe think I might be uncorruptible. Well, actually, maybe I still am, but it's been very, very hard. I'll give you one example. Let's say I create some sort of technology somehow. I do something, and it's really good. If I don't go to the state and use their power to patent it and make it so no one else can copy it, then someone else will do it and I'll lose out. So I have to, if I'm smart, I have to go to the state and corrupt myself and use their power. And I'm totally against patents. I'm totally against IP, intellectual property, or at least enforcing it by the state. And so it just goes to show, it just completely corrupts everyone. They all eventually, all the real snakes and slimy people all go to the centers of power. And you're seeing that right there. That's the only place in the U.S. right now that probably has any really good economic activity, and that's because that's where all the money's going.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. economy has turned into like another Lord of the Rings analogy. We have basically the two towers. We have D.C. and we have Wall Street, and those are basically the two towers of power in the United States economy. And those guys decide where the money, who gets the money, on what terms, you know, if they're borrowing at 0% interest rate, if you're a large bank, if you're a hedge fund, you can do a carry trade, you get easy money to borrow, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to transition here to the markets. We've already spent a good 25 minutes talking about politics and philosophy, but let's spend the last parts of the interview talking about your opinion about all this global QE and what's it going to result in, because this is ridiculous. If you've read what happened to lead up to the QE, all the academic papers, there was Ray Dalio of Wall Street who wrote extensively, one of the largest hedge fund managers, this guy's a billionaire, writing, we need to do this, and he doesn't, in his writings, he doesn't talk about anything about the average American, what's going to happen to them. And then you have these central bankers all on the phone with each other now, once a week, doing conference calls all over the globe, coordinating things. What is your opinion of this type of intervention in markets?
Again, it's a natural evolution. Really, this whole system really started to fall apart in 1971 when the gold backing was taken away from the dollar. Ever since then, the entire globe has been on an unbacked fiat currency system, and more countries have gravitated towards horrible things like democracy and just nation states and socialism. So it's actually a natural progression that we end up where we are today, because you have all these governments printing actually spending tons of money. There's no way for them to pay for it all, so they print tons of money. And so we almost had the system collapse in 1979. The only reason we didn't is because the debt levels hadn't built up to a massive level at that point. So they could actually let the interest rate rise, and that would quell the inflation, and things could sort of reset a little bit, and that's what happened. But now the debt levels are just massive. Almost every government in the West has unpayable debts. And if the interest rates rise, for example, even in the U.S. to about 11 to 13%, every penny of their tax revenue, extortion revenue, would go just to pay off interest on the debt. So this system is dead. George Soros actually said in 2008 the financial system died, and it did. The only thing, it's a zombie system right now. It's being kept afloat on inflation. They're just going to print as much money as they have to keep it alive a little bit longer, so the champagne socialists and the limousine libertarians and all those kind of guys can keep eating their caviar because they never produce anything. And what you're talking about, how they're all starting to coordinate, they actually have to, because in 2009, the whole system almost collapsed because they weren't very coordinated. This system is so precarious at this point that they have to make sure they're watching every single thing at every single moment to make sure they're pumping money wherever it needs to go to make sure that no one fails anymore. Because if one thing fails, anything large, like even an AIG or anything bigger, a nation state, if even one fails, it'll bring the whole financial system down. So they have to be continuously paying attention, continuously coordinating to pump money wherever it needs to go just to keep the system alive. It's basically a dead man. It's weekend at Bernie's right now, and it's been that way for about 4 years. People are slowly starting to notice, but not many people still notice, and it's amazing. And that's, again, because of the indoctrination and propaganda, but it's also because people are so busy just working, trying to keep alive because they've been so impoverished. They don't even have time to pay attention to what's really going on out there. But if they did, they pay attention to people like yourself or people like us at the Dollar Vigilante, they'll kind of know what's going on. I personally think we have a few more years left in the system because people still haven't figured out what's going on. I think they're going to keep printing money, though, and I think the end game is hyperinflation of every currency on Earth. They're all in a race to the bottom. They've been in a race to the bottom since 1971. It hasn't gone up at all. There's not one currency that's gone up since 1971. They just keep going down. It's just different rates of going down. So it's just going to continue to escalate at this point because there's not much chance of a government like the U.S. government, like Barack Obama, stepping up to the microphone and saying, hey, remember all that hope and change I talked about? Sorry, I was wrong. We're broke tomorrow, no welfare checks, no socialist insecurity checks, no Medicaid checks. He's not going to do that. He'd be hung from trees in a matter of seconds. So the easier way for him is just to keep printing money, and that's always the politician's easiest way out, because not many people understand where this inflation comes from. And what they'll do is they'll blame it on capitalism. They'll say it's greedy corporations and that sort of thing. And that's why we really got to get this message out there. Because if people believe that was all capitalism, then once the system gets destroyed, we'll head to some sort of horrible communism, even worse than what we have today. And that would be even a worst-case scenario. So really, that's the reason I'm doing what I'm doing today, is to get this message out there and give us some hope for the future. Some real hope, not Barack Obama hope.
Yeah, and, it is, some people might listen to this podcast and say that, oh, Jason and Jeff are doom and gloomers, but we're not doom and gloomers. We're just trying to tell people the truth. And once you know the truth, once you know the real inflation rate, the laws are going to be changed not in your favor, then you can do an action on it and plan on it, and you're going to end out pretty good compared to almost everyone else, and your life's not going to end, and you're not going to be completely ruined financially, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the way I like to look at things, and, I wish more Americans would wake up, but the day of reckoning is coming. I think they're going to be able to postpone things, keep things in a stagflation. I think we'll see a worsening stagflation until maybe 2015, 2016. And then once the velocity of money and inflationary expectations all over the globe pick up, people are not going to want to hold the money, and then that's probably about it.
Yeah, that's generally what I'm predicting as well. We have stagflation right now, obviously. We have no economic growth anywhere. We haven't for quite a while, actually, since 2001, in my opinion. And large amounts of inflation. It's amazing that all these banks are announcing all these new inflationary measures at a time when oil prices are near all-time nominal highs, when food prices are near all-time nominal highs. People are bankrupt just trying to go to college for 4 years. It's going to cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we're almost at a hyperinflation right now, and now they're going to pile on top of it. So it's really incredible to see the stupidity. But, again, they really have no other choice. So maybe they actually know what's going on, but they've just chosen this way out rather than default and almost complete chaos in a place like the U.S. You can only imagine what would happen there if they turned off those welfare cards. I wouldn't want to be around for a little while at that point. I think that's what a lot of those zombie movies are all about.
Well, I think the banks are being saved at the expense of Main Street. And one of the ways they're going to be able to extend this longer probably than we think is they're just going to keep changing the statistics around, like all of them. Like, for example, in March of 2009, one of the reasons the bank stocks took off again is that they suspended the FASB mark-to-market accounting rules for banks, and now you have talking heads on CNBC and Bloomberg talking about how healthy the bank balance sheets are, who don't even remember 3 or 4 years ago that they had to suspend all the accounting rules for the banks to make them look solvent when they're obviously insolvent despite record profits that the banks are earning now. They're still insolvent.
Yeah, it's truly unbelievable again. Everything's unbelievable. The one thing I would say, though, to people, because a lot of people get really angry at banks. Again, these are the kind of people who get angry at capitalism. These banks that exist in the U.S. today are nothing to do with free market banks. These are they're an arm of the state. They're one and the same with the state. And the Federal Reserve was actually created just to make sure that the banks never fail. And the banks actually own the Federal Reserve, or at least as far as we know. They're so secretive, but that appears to be the case. And so Ben Bernanke and the Federal Reserve, they're not here to actually help people. They're here to help the banks, and so is the government at this point. And it's unbelievable. So, yeah, they just change the rules whenever they want to keep these zombie banks alive.
Yeah, and I think with the inflation statistics here in the U.S., like as underreported and dishonest as they are, I think we're going to get to eventually those Argentina-type levels where the government is going to report, 9 or 10% inflation rate maybe, and then if you go and walk the streets and talk to the people on the streets, they're going to say it's like 25, more like 25 to 30%. I think the U.S. is going to get to those levels. That's the type of pain it's going to take before the sheeple start waking up.
Yeah, well, the money supply base has already increased. It's been over 10% since 2008. That's a record amount of time for the increase in the money supply to be over 10% per year for that length of time. And now it looks like it's going to be increasing even more. We're showing it with our Austrian economics way of calculating the money supply, which is much different than the CPI and all those sort of government lies. We're showing it around 13% right now, and it's on its way back up with this new round of QE. So yeah, it's already in the above 10%, really, and so it's just a matter of when it trickles down to every part of the economy. It's always a little bit of it takes a couple of years usually to get through the entire economy. And yeah, I'm expecting much higher than 30% at some point. We'll probably go into the thousands and tens of thousands, and eventually the dollar will be worth zero, which is about its intrinsic value. So it eventually will reach its intrinsic value probably in the next 5 years.
Well, then it's going to be time, as gold skyrockets, and it's going to be time to start trading in gold for more productive assets then.
Yeah, that's going to be the tricky part, but we'll deal with that when we get there. Until then, I'm holding my gold and I'm not selling for sure. And I try to tell people that what I'm expecting to happen, you won't be able to buy gold for U.S. dollars in the next few years, because as more and more people start to realize what's going on, no one will sell their gold for Federal Reserve notes at that point, because they'll all see where it's headed. But you bring up a good point. That's going to be the next big thing, and that we'll be trying to figure out after the system collapses, is when to actually sell our gold, because at that point people will be clamoring because they won't be able to even buy it for anything. They'll be offering you their house to buy some gold, or anything that they can to buy some gold. At that point we'll probably sell. But until then we're hanging on and just happy to be keep our purchasing power. Because that's what this is really all about, and most people aren't, and that's why more people are finding themselves not able to pay the bills more and more. They're paying for going to McDonald's and buying food on credit cards. It's because their purchasing power has been destroyed by the inflation from the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, I think most people in the financial community have heard some of the stories about hyperinflation from Weimar, where the boy who was working at the hotel, he had one gold coin, and then by the end of the hyperinflation, he was able to buy the whole hotel for one gold coin. And there's other, wheelbarrow and other stuff stories. So you can't just hold gold and silver for forever. I mean, I like gold and silver, but there's going to be a time where the sheeple, where the herd mentality, everyone comes in, drives it up like in 1980. Although there's no Volcker to save us this time, but the people are going to rush into this thing and create a mania. They're going to drive up the gold and silver stocks at some point in the future, and then it's going to be time to sell and cash it in for other undervalued assets. Yeah,
I agree. Although I'm not panicking about when to sell gold. I'm happy to hold it even if I miss the whole peak and everything, just because I'll still have something. Gold's never going to go to zero unless they come up with some sort of alchemy way to create gold, which is possible in the future. But until then, it won't. And that's an excellent point, Jason. I really think that the gold junior stocks right now are something that people should really be looking at. They've been really beaten down, unbelievably, considering gold is at around $1,700 an ounce. They haven't really gone up vis-a-vis gold since gold was at $300 an ounce. And I really think this latest round of QE, what's going on, is going to be the spark that finally sets off these stocks. And like you said, in 1980, many of these stocks went from 2 cents. One went from 2 cents to $13. I don't even know what that percentage rate was. But, you see these kind of returns. Now, there's going to be a trick there, too, because we have to get out before the whole system collapses. But so it's definitely dangerous times right now. This is not easy. Your government financial advisor definitely has no clue what's going on right now, and you shouldn't be listening to him. You should be doing your own research. This is going to be the most dangerous time for human capital in human history. It's going to be probably the most dangerous time in human history in general. We've never had it in the entire world financial system collapse, and not many people are expecting it, and that's the most dangerous part. So it's going to be interesting times. You got to stay awake, pay attention, be smart. But if you do those things, you have a very good chance of surviving. It's mostly the people who really have no clue who are going to get really hurt, and that's too bad, and I'm really sorry about that. And that's why I'm trying to say this as much as possible on YouTube or on anywhere I can, just to get the message out there. Well, that was great, and don't want to keep you too much longer, Jeff, so can you please just tell our listeners more about your newsletter, what types of products and services you guys offer? And then, any last comments you have on the markets, or, if you want to say anything else to our listeners. Sure, thank you. Our website is dollarvigilante.com. We have a free blog right on the front page. You just put in your email, and we'll send you. We write daily to our readers, mostly all this kind of stuff that we've been talking about on this podcast. We also have a paid-for newsletter, which is $150 a year or $250 a year if you want junior gold stock advice direct from one of the best gold stock analysts in the world, Ed Bugos. And you can sign up for that again on dollarvigilante.com. We also have one more product which is related, which is the Golden Trader, TDV Golden Trader. That's the actual URL, tdvgoldentrader.com. And that's more of a trading newsletter with one of the best gold stock traders around there. So we've got the sort of the products that we think people will want. That's what entrepreneurs do. That's what free markets do. We've sort of predicted this is going to head this way, and we're creating products. We're finding the best analysts and the best traders to write the best information for people to kind of help guide them. And so you can get all that information at our websites.
And you also, to add one more thing, one more product I think you forgot, you also have your passport services here for some of our listeners who are starting to wake up and starting to question, maybe they can move their cash flow outside the United States. Maybe they don't have a brick-and-mortar job here in the U.S. They have a business that's online. Tell our listeners about that, the ones who may be interested in getting some passport help and some dual citizenship outside the U.S.
Sure, yeah. One of the big things, what we've been talking about, it's going to be fairly hairy in the U.S. in the next few years. And it's not going to be a lot of opportunity because of what's going on. It's definitely not going to be any growth, no major growth anyway, and a lot of problems because these government regulations are destroying everything. So what we're saying to people is if you have the opportunity, or if you have any assets or capital, or if you actually work over the Internet, or you can live somewhere else, we say go live somewhere else if you can. And we talk about places like Latin America and Asia as being two much better places, much freer, much higher growth areas, and help people get passports, foreign passports, to help them to get out of the country, and also open things like bank accounts. Americans nowadays can't even open bank accounts around the world. There's only a few places that still accept them because the U.S. government is so onerous with the regulations. So we can help people get passports from anywhere from a few months to a few years, and all different price points. And you can check it out at tdvpassports.com.
Okay, great. And thank you very much for your time, Jeff, and hopefully we'll have you back on soon.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thanks very much, Jason.